Today I'm going to be teaching you faux calligraphy. I love this style because all you need is a pencil, but you can still get those beautiful thin and thick lines like traditional calligraphy. So grab your pencil, grab your workbook, let's jump in. I always start by teaching the basic strokes. I love these because they really are the foundation to learning lettering. If you can learn these basic strokes that look like funny, random little shapes, then you can master lettering. So the first thing I wanted to walk you through are just these guidelines that you see here. So in the workbook, there's these different guidelines that are going to help us as we're learning. So we have here, this is called the baseline. That's where the base of all the letters sit. We have the waistline. Almost all the lowercase letters come up to that point. We have the ascender line where any letter, lowercase letter that has a portion of it that ascends above the waistline, it would come up to this point. You have the descender line, so any letter that has a portion of it that descends below the baseline would come down to here. And then of course you have this slanted angle line that's traditional in lettering and calligraphy. So I'm going to walk you through each of these basic strokes and give you a few tips with each of them. The other thing to know with faux calligraphy is that anytime we're moving our pen in an upward direction, we're going to use a thin line. And anytime we're moving our pen in a downward direction, that's when we're going to add a thickness to it. So I'll walk you through each of these strokes, let you know when to have thin lines and thick lines, and hopefully give you a good foundation for your lettering. So the first stroke is called an upstroke. It starts at the baseline and it's a slight curve up to the waistline. And you can draw right into the workbook like this, or you can put a piece of Canson marker tracing paper on top and you can do some tracing. So you can trace the first few and then try a few on your own. And we're moving in an upward direction with this upstroke, so it's going to be a nice thin line. Next is the downstroke. We're going to start at the waistline and we're going to go down to the baseline. Because we're moving our pen down, we need to add a thickness to it. So we'll add our thickness on. So I usually draw the stroke, then add the thickness. And you can draw right over those angle lines if that's helpful. That's the downstroke. Next is the overturn. It's like an upside down U shape. You start at the baseline, you're curving up to the waistline and curve back down. We're moving down on this side, so that's where we would add our thickness. And it doesn't matter if you add the thickness on the inside or on the outside. There will be certain situations once you start connecting letters together where the spacing will help you determine where to add it, but there's no right or wrong side to add it to. You just want to make sure if you're moving down, that side has a thickness. The underturn is like a U shape, so you're starting at the waistline, curving down to the baseline and curving back up again. And so we're moving down on this side, so that's where we're going to add our thickness. So it's like a U shape. And you can draw it right by those angle lines if that helps. And just the one side has the thickness. Next is called a comma dot. This one you start at the waistline and you're going to come about halfway down into a small, little baby underturn. And it's just this little tiny side that you're moving down, so there's just a tiny bit of thickness there on that side. That's the comma dot. From here you can take your workbook and turn it over to the back. And the next we have a compound curve. So this one starts at the baseline, curves up to the waistline, curves back down, and curves up again. And we're moving down in this middle section, so that's where we would add our thickness. So it's this kind of squiggly shape. We want to make sure we have equal amounts of space here and here. So we don't want something like this. If you do that, you would add your thickness to this side to hopefully try to balance it out a little bit. But generally speaking, you want equal amounts of space on both sides. Next is going to be the O form. It looks like the sun came out. Next is going to be an O form, We start at the 2 o'clock position, so here, and you work your way up and around and then connect. So this is an oval shape, and really the angle should be like the center axis of this oval. We're moving our pen down on this side, so this entire side is where our thickness would be. And something I also want to mention is there's something called a reverse O form. So this regular O form, we started here. A reverse O form, you start on the opposite side and work in the opposite direction, making this the side that has the thickness. And we use this reverse O form on the letter B, K, and P. Next is an ascending loop. You'll start at the waistline and you'll do a loop up to the ascender line and come back down. You're moving your pen down this entire side, so this whole side has a thickness. So small loop, bring it down, fill it in. Next is a descending loop. You start at the waistline, curve down to the descender line, and then back up again. And we're adding our thickness, or we're moving down on this side, so that's where our thickness is being added. Those are all of the basic strokes. And what's so cool is when you start combining them, if you take an O form and underturn, you just squish it together, you get the letter A. Or you take an O form, a descending loop, and an upstroke, squish it together, and you get the letter G. So these basic strokes combine in different ways to make almost all of the lowercase letters. So really, if you do work hard to practice and master these basic strokes, you will be able to master lettering. Now that we know the basic strokes, we can start going through all of the lowercase letters. So you'll notice in the workbook, there are these little guides at the top that show you which basic stroke is used to make the letter, which is helpful. And you can use your tracing paper again to place over the top so you can do some tracing, and then you can do some on your own. The other thing that I wanted to mention is this is a stylized alphabet, so we will be using the basic strokes, but some of them I've stylized a little bit just to be a little bit cuter. So let's start with the letter A. This one we're going to draw an O form and an underturn. And it's the two strokes, we're just squishing them together. And then we just want to pay attention if you ever get confused, like where do I add my thickness? Remember, it's where you're moving your pen down. So it's going to be this side and here. The same as those basic strokes that we practiced. That's where you add your thickness on. So for the letter B, this one we are using a little entry stroke. It's like an upstroke, but it's just flipped the other way. And then we have an ascending loop. If I cover that, you can see there's the ascending loop. So we've got our little stylized upstroke that goes into an ascending loop. We have our reverse O form. If you remember, that starts on this side and works your way around, and then a stylized upstroke. So again, and we lift our pen between strokes, and then we add the thickness when you're done with the letter. There's the letter B. Next is C. This one starts like an O form at the 2 o'clock position. Instead of connecting it, you kick the bottom out to the right. And we're moving our pen down on this side, so it's that whole side. That's where the thickness would be. Next is the letter D. This one is going to be an O form with a downstroke and an underturn. So O form, downstroke, underturn, O form, downstroke, underturn. And we're moving our pen down here and here, so that's where the thickness is. Next is the letter E. This one has a small loop and then goes into an O form, but it's kicked out to the right. So it's based on the O form shape, but a little different. And we're moving our pen down here. So that's where our thickness would be that whole side. So small loop and add your thickness. From here, we'll turn our workbook to be upside down, or flip the page over. And next we have the letter F. So this one, you're starting at the baseline, you're doing that stylized upstroke into an ascending loop and a descending loop all in one motion. Lift up, add the upstroke. This whole side is where our thickness is, so that's where we're going to add the thickness. So again, upstroke to ascending loop to descending loop, lift up, upstroke, and add your thickness on. Next is G. This one's going to be an O form with a descending loop and an upstroke. O form, descending loop, upstroke. We're moving our pen down here and here. Next is H. This one is going to be a long downstroke and our first letter with a compound curve. So we add our thickness here because we were moving down and in the center of the compound curve. Next is I. This one is going to be really easy. It's just an underturn and you dot it and then make sure to add your thickness. So underturn and add the dot. And the dot of the I should be a little bit wider than the thickness that's used here. Next is J. Start at the waistline, go down to the descending line to do a descending loop, add an upstroke and a dot, and that's it. So descending loop, upstroke, dot, and we'd add our thickness on this whole side. Next is K. This one's going to be a long downstroke, a little line there, and then part of an underturn. And for K, you can add a thickness here and here if you want. I know a lot of people who only add the thickness on that side. So that one's kind of however you like it is how you can do it. We'll set that one aside and grab our next page. Next is the letter L. So this one is like a really tall E. We're starting with an ascending loop that goes into an underturn. So ascending loop into underturn, and this whole side we're moving down, so we'll add all the thickness there. Next is an M. We've got an overturn, overturn, compound curve. So we're moving down here, here, and here. Overturn, overturn, compound curve. Next is the letter N. Overturn, compound curve, overturn, compound curve. Move your pen down and down. Next is the letter O. So we'll have our O form with our comma dot, and we're moving down on this side and a tiny bit on the comma dot. So add the thicknesses on those sides. Next is the letter P. It's going to be a long downstroke, reverse O form, stylized upstroke. We're moving down here and here. Long downstroke, reverse O form, stylized upstroke. And add our thickness where we're moving our pen down. Q is going to be an O form with a reflected descending loop. So instead of the loop facing this way, it's facing this way, and an upstroke. So O form, reflected descending loop, and upstroke. And we just add our thickness where we're moving down. All right, on this next page, we have a couple letters that are called outlier letters. So there's 3 in the alphabet total. R and S are 2 of them. That just means that they have portions of their letter that aren't made up of the basic strokes. So for the letter R, we're going to start with an upstroke, but we're going to extend it above the waistline. And then we have this little jog, and then it goes into an underturn. So that little middle stroke in there, that's the unique one. And it's going to be this whole entire side that has the thickness. And this one you can do all in one motion. It's kind of like a cursive R, if you're already familiar with that. So you just go up above the waistline, come down into an underturn, and you're just adding the thickness all on this side. Next is the letter S. This one again is going to be an upstroke that goes above the waistline, and then you come down and loop over. So it's not really based on a basic stroke. You're moving down this entire side. So that's why it's really good to practice these outlier letters a little extra, just because they're not based on the basic strokes. Next is T. This one is going to be a downstroke and an underturn. And then we use what's called a crossbar to cross it. And we add our thickness where we're moving our pen down. The crossbar is a great place to add flourishing or the extra loops or fancy things that you notice in calligraphy are called flourishes. So even doing something where you bring that up a little bit can be really fun on the crossbar of the T. Next is a U. This is 2 underturns together, and we're moving our pen down on this side and this side. Underturn, underturn, add the thickness, add the thickness. V is going to be a compound curve with a comma dot. So compound curve, comma dot, and we add our thickness in the middle and a tiny bit on that comma dot. Next is W. It's a compound curve with an underturn and a comma dot. Got to get more lead ready. And we add our thickness here and here. So compound curve, underturn, comma dot. We only have a few more letters. X is another one of those outlier letters. So this one, it starts as a compound curve, but we're just cutting off the ends. So we just start drawing it here, and then we just cross it. And it's this center of the the compound curve, excuse me. That's where the thickness is. So again, this one might take a little bit more time to practice because it is one of those outlier letters. Only 2 more. We have the letter Y. This one is going to be, again, that compound curve with a descending loop and an upstroke. And we add our thickness where we're moving our pen down. The last one is the letter Z. This one kind of fits in the basic strokes. It's kind of like an overturn, kind of like a descending loop, but more loopy and an upstroke. So this is another letter that you might have to practice a little more, but also it's not that common of a letter. And your thickness would be here and here where you're moving your pen down. So that's all the lowercase letters. You have plenty of room to practice, especially if you use your tracing paper over the top. That can be really great for doing some practice with the lowercase letters. Now that you know the lowercase letters, let's talk about connecting the letters really quick. So there's 2 main things you want to look out for when you're connecting letters. So if we write the word hello like we learned, the first thing is we want to have high connection points, meaning we want the end of our letters to come up to the waistline. There is one exception, and that's with the letter E. We only come about halfway up because that's right where the E starts. But the E is going to come up, L's going to come up. And the same with our O, with the comma dot, we'll bring it up. And what this does, I'm going to show you one more example. If we don't do that, say we just decide we're just going to end wherever we want, doesn't really matter. You can see when you do high connection points, it creates these little pockets of negative space, which make the word easier to read. Where this, there's hardly any negative space, and it is harder to make out what this word is saying. So you always just want to make sure you're connecting your letters nice and high. Ease the exception where we're connecting it a little bit lower, but that way it's going to be easier to read. The other thing to consider is the spacing between your letters. So when we write something, the sun can't decide if it wants to be out or not today. The space between these letters here is called kerning. And so we just want it to be consistent. This would be considered like average or regular spacing, but we could do really tight spacing. And when that happens, your letters themselves also get thinner. So you can see the space is thin and the letters are thin. Or we could do something where we go really wide with it. And then again, our letters will also be really wide as well. So none of these are right or wrong, but you'll just want to keep it consistent. So when you're doing your name or your phrase or your composition, you'll just want to stick with regular or stick with tight or stick with wide. You don't want to be mixing a ton of going regular, then super wide, then skinny, then wide, then regular. You want to just kind of choose one and stay consistent. So those are my 2 tips for connecting letters. If you have any specific questions about specific letter connections, let me know and I'm happy to answer those. It's time to go through the uppercase letters. These uppercase letters are so beautiful and fun, and they are not based on the basic strokes. So these take a lot of practice. A lot of lettering artists stick with lowercase for quite some time before moving into uppercase. I know I didn't really do uppercase letters for years until I got more comfortable with it. So I'm going to walk you through each of these so that you can know how to draw them. So again, you can use your tracing paper to trace to get some practice and then try drawing some on your own. So for the letter A, we're going to start here and work our way down into a double loop and then come across. And then we're going to be doing kind of like a downstroke and an underturn here. And we're moving our pen down in this side, here, and here. The letter B has this, instead of a straight line, it's kind of a curve. It's like an S shape. And we'll add a thickness to that. And then our B is going to come up. I made it a little bit high on that one, but you can see it extends. A lot of these uppercase letters extend above the guidelines, and that's okay. Something like this, and then we're moving our pen down here and here. Next is C. For this one, I actually draw it kind of like a C, lowercase, and I do this part, and then I come back to add this. For some reason, if I start here, it does make it challenging, but we do want the thickness drawn as if we started here and worked this way. So if we try it, I'll see if I can do it. Yeah, it just never turns out quite the same. That's the letter C. Next is the letter D. Again, we have that S shape that has a thickness on it. And this whole side is where our thickness is. The E has 2 kind of small circles with a little loop. Moving our pen down here. and here, and here. F, we have a little crossbar, and kind of like an S shape, but it continues, and another crossbar. And we can add a little bit of thickness on this curve as well, because we are moving our pen down there. G, this is another one like the C, where I start with drawing just this, then I go into the descending loop, upstroke, then I'll come back and add that loop in. For some reason that just makes it easier. You might be able to do it where you just start drawing here and work your way around. So something like this, and you add your thickness where you're moving your pen down. We're on to the letter H. So this one has a little stylized upstroke. Then it has a downstroke that goes into a double loop, come across, loop up, into an underturn. So we'll add our thickness here, here, and here. For the letter I, we start here, work our way up, come down. This whole side is where the thickness is. J is kind of similar looking to I. This whole side is where we're moving down. K kind of has a little bit of an S shape here. And then I'm going to draw this part of the K first. And we're moving down here and here. And we don't really want the thickness on the bottom of these. It's like in this middle section where the thickness is. And then from here, we have that little loop. L, again, I'm going to start here like this, and then I can add that loop on. Or you could just leave it here as well. M, this one we're coming up, we come down, and there's kind of a slight curve here. Then we come up like this, and it's where we're moving our pen down, where we add our thickness. And we're moving up, got a downstroke. And I didn't do the loop as the same, I guess it needs to come around. I was like, how did I draw that? There's the N. From here, I can flip my page over, and I have a really large O form for the letter O, and then a big comma dot. My thickness is on this side. An alternate would be something like this, where you kind of, you continue going on the O, and that can look really pretty. For P, we have that S shape and a large curve. Q is going to be the O form. And this one you can do where you add thickness to just one side, or you could add a little bit of thickness to both sides, but not the top and bottom. And that can be kind of a nice look too. R is kind of an S shape, but it's going to come into this double loop. We're going to add our thickness here on the loop and a little bit in that middle section of the R. We don't want the thickness on this part or the bottom, it's just the middle part. S is kind of like a lowercase one, but a little more loopy. We've got a loop here. So this is just a really loopy. More simple S would just be like this. but we're just adding a loop on the top and a double loop in here. T has kind of that S shape with a tail on it, and the crossbar like the F. U is going to be an underturn and an underturn, and we'll add that little entry stroke at the beginning. We've got just a few more letters here. So a V is kind of like a comma dot, or a compound curve, excuse me, but a little tighter with a comma dot. So we're moving our pen down here and here. For W, we're coming down at a diagonal. I kind of got the angle wrong on that first one. So we want to be a little bit more slanted. Moving down here, down here. And I think this middle line is not quite right. I just needed it to connect higher, and I think that fixed it. X is going to be the same as lowercase. We're just adding that extra little loopy on it for fun. Y, very similar to the lowercase, just bigger underturn, descending loop upstroke, and again we'll add that little entry stroke in. And the last one is Z. Something like this, and just add your thickness. So that's all the uppercase letters. There's so many variations and fun things you can do with the flourishing and how you want them to look, but this is like a good basic for what you can do. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope this has helped you learn faux calligraphy, and I hope it gives you the confidence to continue using it in your upcoming projects. If you have any questions, let me know in the Facebook group or shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer anything I can to help you get better and continue to learn faux calligraphy.